Namaste to all. Today we'll be discussing the third part of surface chemistry, that is colloids. We have learned solutions even in the 9th standard, and also in this year the second chapter is also solutions. What are solutions actually? Solutions are homogeneous systems. And we also know that when sand is dissolved in water, the sand is stirred in water, it gives a suspension which slowly settles down with time. Between the two extremes of suspensions and solutions, we come across a large group of systems called colloidal dispersions, or simply colloid. So in this part, we'll be discussing about what is a colloid. Before that, true solutions. A picture of a true solution is given. Next is that of a colloid, and the last one is that of a suspension. So here, an example of a true solution is when sodium chloride or sugar is dissolved in water, they give a homogeneous solution. Particles are of molecular size, they do not settle on standing, and such mixtures are called true solutions. That is, these particles are so small that they cannot be seen even through a microscope. Colloids. Colloids example is milk, starch, solution, jellies, etc. The particle size is in between that of a true solution and less than that of a suspension, that is, larger than solutions and smaller than suspension. The particles are not visible even with a microscope. They have a tendency to settle down slowly, and these are known as colloidal solutions. And what is a suspension? As I had discussed earlier, when clay or chalk powder is added to water, the particles are visible even with the naked eye. They settle on standing. These are called suspensions. Now, the essential difference between a solution and a colloid is that of a particle size. As we can see, the particles are very small, that is, the particle size is less than 1 nanometer in true solution. While in colloids, the particle size is between 1 to 100 nanometer. And in suspension, the particles are large and its size is greater than 100 nanometer. Now, in colloids, just like in solutions, there are two components, solute and solvent. While in colloids, the component's name is different, that is, it is called the dispersed phase and dispersion medium. A colloid is a heterogeneous system in which one substance is dispersed, which is called the dispersed phase. The dispersed is very fine particles in another substance called the dispersion medium. So, the dispersed phase is a component present in small proportion in a colloid. It is just like a solute in a solvent. While the dispersion medium, the component present in excess is called the dispersion media. It is just like a solvent in a solution. Next is the classification of colloids. Colloids are classified on the basis of the following criteria. The first criteria, the first type of classification is classification based on the physical state of the dispersed phase and dispersion medium. The table is clearly given in your textbook also. There are about 8 types of colloidal systems depending upon whether the dispersed phase and dispersion medium are solids, liquids or gases. A gas mixed with another gas forms a homogeneous mixture and hence is not a colloidal system. So except gas and gas, all the other combinations are possible. Now here a table is coming up. We have the dispersed phase, dispersion medium, the type of colloid or the name of colloid and the example. The first type of classification based on the physical state of the dispersed phase and dispersion medium is dispersed phase is in the gaseous state, dispersion medium is liquid, the type of colloid is called foam, and the examples are cream, lather, soap, etc. These type, that is cream, lather and soap, in these type of colloids, the dispersed phase is in the gaseous state, dispersion medium is in the liquid state, and the type of colloid is called foam. These can come as 1-mark question for the board exam, and it had come also in the previous years. So this part has to be learned properly. The second type is gas in solid. That is, dispersed phase is gas while the medium is solid. And that type of colloid is called solid form. And an example is foam, rubber, bread, etc. We know rubber is a solid. It has pores in it in which air is trapped, and that is why the dispersed phase is gas and medium is solid. Same is the case with bread and foam also. The third type of classification is liquid. Liquid in gas. When gas is the dispersion medium, that type of colloid is called aerosol. And the best example are clouds and fog. Actually, clouds or fog, they are liquid droplets in air, and that is why we say it is liquid. Dispersed phase is liquid, dispersion medium is gas. The next type is liquid in liquid. Liquid in liquid type of colloid is called emulsion. And the best example is liquid in liquid is milk, hair cream, etc. Milk is actually liquid fat in water. Next type of colloid, liquid in solid. Liquid in solid type is called gel. And the best example of liquid in solid is curd, jellies, cheese, butter, etc. The gel, from the word gel itself, it's clear that the dispersion medium is solid and phase is liquid. The next is solid in gas. Solid in gas, as I told you earlier, when gas is the dispersion medium, the type of colloid is called aerosol. Actually, solid in gas is aerosol. Here it is given solid form, but in your textbook, when solid is the dispersed phase and dispersion medium is gas, it is called aerosol. There's a correction here. It is aerosol given in your textbook. And the example is smoke, dust, etc. The next type of colloid is solid in liquid. Solid in liquid type of colloid is called salt. It is SO for solid and L for liquid. Easy to learn. So sol is the dispersed phase is solid and dispersion medium is liquid. And the examples of solid in liquid is mud, metallic salts. The one given in your textbook is paints, cell fluids. There was a question in the board exam. What is a dispersed phase and dispersion medium in paint was a question. So you have to learn the examples properly. So paint is not given here in my presentation, but in your textbook there is paint also and cell fluids also. Next is solid in solid. Solid in solid type of colloid is called solid salt. And the examples are some colored gases and gemstones, etc. Actually, alloys are solutions here. So here there is a mistake here. Usually alloys are solid in solid type and they come under solutions. Next type of classification. The second type of classification of colloids is the nature, based on the nature of interaction between the dispersed phase and dispersion medium. Nature of interaction between the dispersed phase and dispersion medium. According to this, there are two types. And the two types are lyophilic colloids and lyophobic colloids. So once again, depending upon the nature of interaction between the dispersed phase and dispersion medium, colloidal salts are divided into two categories, namely lyophilic, which is solvent attracting, and lyophobic, which is solvent repelling. And if water is a dispersion medium, the term used are, instead of lyophilic and lyophobic, it is hydrophilic and hydrophobic. So, what are lyophilic salts? Lyophilic salts, the dispersed phase means a solute type part, have great affinity for the dispersion medium. That is, the word lyophilic means liquid loving. That is the meaning of the word lyophilic. And what is lyophobic? The dispersed phase and dispersion medium have less affinity. So lyophilic is solvent loving type of salts, while lyophobic is solvent hating. That is, in lyophilic, the dispersed phase has greater affinity for the dispersion medium. In lyophilic, it has less affinity for the dispersion medium. The next is the distinction between lyophilic and lyophobic salt. It is very easy also and usually comes for the board exam also. The difference is, the first difference is reversible. That is, lyophilic is reversible while lyophobic is irreversible. That is, in lyophilic colloids, colloidal salts directly formed by mixing substances like gum, gelatin, starch, rubber, etc. with a suitable liquid, which is the dispersion medium, are called lyophilic salts. And if the dispersion medium is heated from the dispersed phase, say for example by evaporation, the salt can be reconstituted by simply remixing with the dispersion medium. That is, once it is separated by any physical methods, it can also mixed together. And that is why we say these type of salts are called reversible salts. They can be prepared also by mixing with the dispersion medium, and also they can be separated also. While the lyophobic salts are irreversible. In lyophobic, as I mentioned earlier, is liquid hating. Substances like metals, their sulfides, etc., when simply mixed with the dispersion medium, do not form a colloidal salt. Their colloidal salts can be prepared by separate or special methods. These salts are readily precipitated on addition of small amounts of electrolytes. So once they are made, they cannot be separated, and that is why we say they are irreversible. That is, lyophobic salts are irreversible. As I told you, lyophilic can be easily prepared, while lyophobic special methods are used for their preparation. The next very important characteristic of lyophilic salt is they are more stable and they do not coagulate. Coagulate means the particles do not come closer. They do not settle down. While lyophobic is less stable and they are easy to coagulate. In lyophilic, the particle size is small, while in lyophobic, the particle size is large. Particles cannot be detected even under an ultra microscope, while particles can be detected even under ultra microscope. In lyophilic, there is less scattering in Tyndall effect. Tyndall effect shown is less, while here the scattering of particles is more. In lyophilic, it is more viscous than water, same as that of water is for lyophobic. The surface tension is less than water, while it is same as water. So you can go through a textbook properly for the difference between lyophilic and lyophobic salts. That is, in lyophobic, these salts can be readily precipitated on addition of a small amount of electrolyte or by heating or by shaking, and hence these are not stable. And further, once precipitated, they do not give back the colloidal salt by the simple addition of the dispersion medium. And that is why we say they are irreversible salts. And hope it is clear to you. The next type of classification is classification based on the type of particles of the dispersed phase. And according to this classification, it is divided into three: multi-molecular colloids, macromolecular colloids, and associated colloids. The first one is multi-molecular colloids. In multi-molecular colloids, on dissolution, a large number of atoms or smaller molecules of a substance aggregate together to form species having the size of the colloidal ring. That is, before the dissolution, the particles are very small. But after dissolution, the atoms, the smaller atoms or molecules, they will come together, they will aggregate together to form a colloidal particle. And that is how this type of colloids are formed. The species thus formed are called multi-molecular colloids. For example, a gold salt may contain particles of various sizes having many atoms. Sulfur salt consists of particles containing 1,000 or more of S8 sulfur molecules. So after dissolution, these small atoms or molecules, they come together of colloidal range. So here atoms or molecules aggregate to form colloidal particles. Example, gold salt, sulfur salt, etc. Here you can find the gold atoms aggregate to form particles of 1 to 100 nanometers. So this that you can see becomes a particle of colloidal range. Sulfurs are also colloidal particles containing about 1000 S8 molecules. They come together, they aggregate together of colloidal range. The second type is macromolecular colloids. Macromolecular colloids in suitable solvents form solutions in which the size of the macromolecules may be in the colloidal range. That is, already the particles are in the colloidal range. They are bigger particles. Such systems are called macromolecular colloids. These colloids are quite stable and resemble true solutions in many respects. Examples of naturally occurring macromolecules are starch, cellulose, proteins, and enzymes. And those of man-made macromolecules are polythene, nylon, polystyrene, synthetic rubber, etc. So macromolecules, they are large molecules like starch, cellulose, proteins, synthetic rubber, etc. have the size in the colloidal range. Such substances on dissolution give macromolecular colloids. The third type of classification based on the type of particles is associated colloids. Associated colloids are micelles. These are some substances which at low concentration behave as normal strong electrolytes, but at higher concentration exhibit colloidal behavior due to the formation of aggregates. That is, at low concentrations, the particles are smaller. They behave as electrolytes means they're smaller particles. But as the concentration is increased, these particles will aggregate together to become a colloidal particles. The aggregated particles are called micelles, and these are called associated colloids. The formation of micelles takes place only above a particular temperature called Kraft temperature, K-R-A-F-T, Kraft temperature, and above a particular concentration called critical micelle concentration, that is CMC. On dilution, these colloids will get back to their individual ions. So associated colloids, substances like soap in dilute solution. When soap is dissolved in the solution is very dilute, they'll behave as electrolytes. But as the concentration of the soap increases, the particles associate or aggregate to form colloidal particles, which are known as micelles. The mechanism of micelle formation. We have learned that in the 10th standard also. An example here shown is sodium stearate soap, C17H35COONA, which dissociates into C17H35CO- and Na+. So these are the two ions, cation and the anion. At low concentration, they behave as ions, simply Na plus ions, and in the solution it exists as Na plus ions and C17H35COO- ions. Above a particular concentration is when the concentration of soap is increased, and that is called the critical micelle concentration or CMC. And above a particular temperature called Kraft temperature, these ions aggregate, as I told you earlier, to form colloid. So here you can see a soap. When you take an example of a soap, the major component, that is when it is dissolved in water, as I told you earlier, it dissociates into RCOO- and Na plus ions. The RCO ions, however, consist of two parts, a long hydrocarbon chain, which is also called a non-polar tail, which is hydrophobic, that is water repelling. That is, the hydrocarbon chain is hydrophobic or water repelling. And the polar group is the COO-. It is also called a polar ionic head, which is hydrophilic or water loving. That is, the alkyl part is a non-polar tail, which is usually referred to as a non-polar tail, is hydrophobic, and the CO-, which is called the polar ionic head, is hydrophilic or water loving. The RCO- ions are therefore present on the surface with their COO- groups in water, because CO- group is water loving. So it will be underwater, and the hydrocarbon chains are staying away from it and they will remain in the surface. But when the concentration is increased at critical Mizell concentration, the anions are pulled into the bulk of the solution and aggregate to form a spherical shape, as you can see here, with their hydrocarbon chains pointing towards the center of the sphere, with the COO minus part remaining outward on the surface of the sphere. An aggregate thus formed is known as an ionic micelle, and these micelles may contain as many as 100 such ions. So in the diagram you can see when the concentration is increased, the alkyl part is hydrophobic, so it comes in the center, and in water will be the COO minus. So many particles will get aggregated together. This actually is applied in the cleansing action of soap, which is also called emulsification. As we know that a micelle consists of a hydrophobic hydrocarbon-like central core. The cleansing action of soap is due to the fact that soap molecules form a micelle around the oil droplet in such a way that the hydrophobic part of the stearate ion is in the oil droplet. That is, the alkyl part is in the oil droplet, and the hydrophilic part projects out of the grease droplet like bristles. Since the polar groups can interact with water, the oil droplet surrounded by the stearate ions is now pulled in water and removed from the dirty surface. Thus, soap helps in emulsification and washing away of oils and fats. That is, once again, when the concentration of soap increases, and if you are trying to wash a dirty cloth, the alkyl part, which is hydrophobic, is grease loving. So the alkyl part will get mixed with the grease and the CO minus will remain in water. On rubbing properly, the grease from the cloth is pulled out, and this is the cleansing action of soap. Reading it once again. In the cleansing action of soap, the soap molecules form micelle around the dirt. The R part is towards the dirt and the CO minus towards water. The CO minus interacts with water and pulls away the dirt into the water. The next is the preparation of colloids. The preparation of colloids. The primary consideration in the preparation is that the particle size should be within the range 1 to 100 nanometers. So when you are preparing a colloid, the particle should come under this range, otherwise it will not be called a colloid. Lyophilic salts, these are prepared by just mixing the substance with the dispersion medium, as we have learned earlier. The method consists of the preparation of a lyophilic salt is the dispersion method. What is a dispersion method? Dispersion method is breaking down large particles into particles of colloidal size. The breaking of large particles. When there are larger particles not of colloidal range, they can be broken into the particles of colloidal range. Next is condensation method, the second one. Grouping molecules into aggregates of colloidal size. That is called condensation method. The first one we learn, dispersion method. Dispersion method given in a textbook is electrical dispersion or electrical disintegration or Bredick's arc method. What is this process? This process involves dispersion as well as condensation. Both are there. Colloidal salts of metals such as gold, silver, platinum, etc. can be prepared by this method. In this method, an electric arc is struck between electrodes of the metal immersed in the dispersion medium, as you can see in the figure. The intense heat produced vaporizes the metal, which then condenses to form particles of colloidal size. You can see two electrodes there. The mixture is kept there in the beaker. The dispersion medium is there. The dispersed phase is there, which is kept in an ice bath. So the first thing is an electric arc is, that is whatever, for example, if you're going to prepare a gold sol or whatever you're going to prepare, that is taken as the electrodes. Here the electrode consists of the metals that you are taking. And when an electric arc is struck, between the electrodes of the metal, which is immersed in a dispersion medium, the heat will vaporize the metal. And because it is placed on an ice bath, the condensation also will take place. So this is both dispersion and condensation. So the explanation here, an electric arc is set up between the two electrodes of the metal whose colloid is to be prepared. That is, you are taking in the beaker only the dispersion medium, and the metal, that is the dispersed phase, is actually the electrodes whose colloid is to be prepared in water containing traces of alkali also is present. The metal first vaporizes because of the strong heat, and the vapors gets condensed because it is kept in an ice bath in water to give aggregates of colloidal state. Colloidal solutions of gold is known as purple of Cassius. The second method is dispersion method itself. Second one, B, is peptization. Peptization is very important. Peptization may be defined as a process of converting a precipitate into a colloidal salt by shaking it with a dispersion medium in presence of small amount of electrolyte. Once again repeating it, peptization is defined as a process of converting a precipitate. Precipitate is a bigger particle that is broken down, that is precipitate, into colloidal salt. How is it done? By shaking it with a dispersion medium. We need a dispersion medium in presence of a small amount of electrolyte. The electrolyte used for this purpose is known as peptizing agent. This method is applied generally to convert a freshly prepared precipitate into a colloidal salt. What happens during peptization? During peptization, the precipitate adsorbs one of the ions of the electrolyte on its surface. This causes the development of a positive or a negative charge on the precipitate. So when the charge is same, what will happen? It will ultimately break up into smaller particles of colloidal range. For example, if you precipitate a ferric hydroxide, and when we want to convert a precipitate of ferric hydroxide into a colloidal salt. So for that, what you have to do, ferric hydroxide has to be dissolved in a proper dispersion medium, and to it you have to add a peptizing agent or the electrolyte. Electrolyte added is called the peptizing agent. For example, the peptizing agent added is FeCl3. The condition is one of the ions should be same. Ferric hydroxide is a precipitate, so we are adding an electrolyte which is a common ion in it. So we are adding an electrolyte FeCl3. So as a result, what happens? The ferric hydroxide adsorbs Fe2 plus on the surface. So the precipitate becomes positively charged because it has adsorbed Fe2 plus ions. And as a result, when the charge is the same, what happens? It will break into smaller particles of colloidal range. So here, if a freshly prepared precipitate is shaken with a suitable electrolyte to be converted to a colloidal solute, this method is known as peptization. As I had explained of ferric hydroxide, same is the case of AgCl, aluminium hydroxide. All these can be prepared by the method of peptization. Next, the second one, condensation method. In condensation method, in your textbook, it is given in the beginning itself. This involves a number of chemical reactions. That is, the salts can be prepared also by chemical methods. The first one is double decomposition method is used for salts of sulfide. That is, arsenous sulfide salt can be prepared by the mixing of As2O3 and hydrogen sulfide. This reaction is an example of a double decomposition reaction. Second one, salts of certain metals also can be prepared by this. A gold salt. How to prepare a gold salt? It can come for the board exam. That is prepared by mixing AuCl3 and SnCl. This is one way of preparing. In your textbook, there is another reaction given, AuCl3 plus formaldehyde plus water. In this way, also through reduction, you can prepare gold salt, that is Au plus HCOOH plus HCl. So in your textbook, there is another reaction given. Next is the preparation of sulfur salt. Sulfur salt can be prepared by mixing H2S plus O2. Use H2O plus S is one reaction given but in a textbook the reaction given is sulfur dioxide plus hydrogen sulfide. By the method of oxidation, you can get converted to sulfur plus H2O. So both the methods are actually correct. The next one is hydrolysis, is used for preparing hydroxide colloid, that is ferric hydroxide colloid. How can you prepare ferric hydroxide colloid, which you will be doing it in your lab also? It is with the hydrolysis of ferric chloride. FeCl3 plus H2O forms ferric hydroxide salt. So these are some of the methods, some of the chemical methods of preparation of colloids. The next part is, the third part is the purification of colloidal solutions. Purification of colloidal solutions. Colloidal solutions, when prepared, generally contain excessive amount of electrolytes and some other soluble impurities. While the presence of traces of electrolyte is essential for the stability of colloidal solution, when there are larger amounts, coagulation will take place. So it is therefore necessary to reduce the concentration of these soluble impurities to a requisite minimum. The process used for reducing the amount of impurities to a requisite minimum is known as purification of colloidal solutions. So next is purification of colloidal solutions. Once again repeating it, when prepared, colloidal solutions usually contain excessive amount of electrolytes and some other soluble impurities. Small amounts of electrolytes are essential for the stability of colloid, while excess electrolytes can cause coagulation. The soluble impurities, which are called electrolytes, are to be removed for the stability of the colloids, otherwise coagulation will take place. So the first method of purification of colloids is dialysis. What is dialysis? It is a process of removing a dissolved substance from a colloidal solution by means of diffusion through a semi-permeable membrane. As you can see here, the impure colloidal solution is kept in a semi-permeable membrane, and the smaller particles which is kept in the water, inside a beaker containing water, the smaller electrolytes can pass through the pores of the semi-permeable membrane, while the bigger colloidal particles will stay inside the membrane. That is, since particles of electrolytes or true solution are very small, they cannot pass through the animal membrane or the animal membrane can be a parchment paper or a cellophane sheet. The apparatus used for this purpose is called the dialyzer. A bag of a suitable membrane containing the colloidal solution is suspended in a vessel through which fresh water is continuously flowing. You can find the water flow, inlet and outlet is there. The molecules and the ions of the electrolytes will diffuse through the membrane into the outer water, and pure colloidal solution is left inside. This process is called dialysis. The explanation I'm reading: colloidal particles cannot pass through a parchment membrane or a cellophane membrane, while the ions can pass through it. In dialysis, the colloid is taken in a cellophane bag or an animal membrane bag and allowed to stand in a vessel through which fresh water is continuously flowing. The smaller particles passes through the membrane, when the colloidal particles will remain inside. When prepared, colloidal solutions usually contain excessive amount of electrolytes and some other soluble impurities. Small amounts of electrolytes are essential for the stability of a colloid, while excess electrolytes can cause coagulation. The soluble impurities are to be removed for the stability of a colloid, which is written earlier also. I've just read it out. The second method of purification of colloid is electrodialysis. Dialysis is usually slow. The process can be quickened by applying an electric field. This process is called electrodialysis. As you can see here, ordinarily the process of dialysis is quite slow. I'm repeating it. It can be made faster by applying an electric field if the dissolved substance in the impure colloidal solution is only an electrolyte. The process is named electrodialysis. The colloidal solution is placed in a bag of a suitable membrane while pure water is taken outside. Electrodes are fitted in the compartment as shown in the figure. The ions present in the colloidal solution will migrate out to the oppositely charged electrodes. The third one is ultrafiltration. Ultrafiltration is the process of separating the colloidal particles from the solvent and soluble solutes present in the colloidal solution by specially prepared filters, which are permeable to all substance except colloidal particles. That is, the filter papers made through which, when the particles are passing through the filter paper, specially made filters, the colloidal particles cannot pass through the filter paper. Colloidal particles can pass easily through an ordinary filter paper because the pores are too large. However, when the pores of the filter paper can be reduced, that is, how can it be reduced? By dipping it in a solution called collodion to stop the flow of colloidal particles. The usual collodion is a 4% solution of nitrocellulose in a mixture of alcohol and ether. So, collodion is 4% solution of nitrocellulose in a mixture of alcohol and ether. An ultrafilter paper may be prepared by soaking the filter paper in this solution and then making it hard by dipping it in formaldehyde and then finally drying it. This is called the ultrafilter paper. The pore size is reduced and the colloidal particles cannot pass through the filter paper. This process is called ultrafiltration. Colloidal particles can be separated from other solution by ultrafiltration. Reading it once again, ordinary filter paper has large pores and the colloidal particles will pass through it. The pores can be made smaller by soaking the filter paper in a solution of gelatin or collodion and then hardening them by soaking in formaldehyde and then drying it. These filter papers are known as ultrafilter papers and they can retain the colloidal solutions, colloidal particles, and other ions can be removed from it. The colloidal particles are then treated with fresh dispersion medium to get the pure colloid. The process is slow and to speed up a process, suction also can be applied. The next part of this colloids is the properties of colloidal solutions. Properties of colloidal solutions. Various properties exhibited by colloidal solutions are described below. The first property, as we know, colloids are heterogeneous in nature. They are not homogeneous, they are heterogeneous. Unlike true solutions, colloids are heterogeneous. They consist of two phases, the dispersed phase and the dispersion medium. The particles are bigger than the particles of a true solution. That is, they cannot be seen with the naked eye. The second one, colligative properties. Colloidal particles being bigger aggregates, the number of particles in colloidal solution is comparatively small as compared to the true solution. In true solution, the particles are smaller, so there are more number of particles. While in colloidal salt, the particles will be less because the particles are bigger. Hence, the values of colligative properties. Colligative properties, those who have learned solutions will be clear to you. Those who have not learned colligative properties, that is chapter 2 solutions, you will learn it later on. Hence, the values of colligative properties like osmotic pressure, lowering in vapor pressure, depression in freezing point, and elevation in boiling point are of small order as compared to the values shown by true solutions at the same concentration. So reading it once again, properties like osmotic pressure, depression in freezing point, elevation of boiling point, and lowering of vapor pressure are called colligative properties, which you'll be learning in solution chapter 2, since they depend on the number of particles and not on the nature of the particles. So colligative properties are those properties which depend upon the number of particles and not on the nature of the particles. In colloids, the particles are aggregates, or each particle is composed of many atoms or molecules. Hence, the number of particles is less and the colligative properties like osmotic pressure are less for colloidal solutions. The third property of colloidal solution is optical properties. That is, the colloid shows Tyndall effect. What is Tyndall effect? Scattering of light by the colloidal particles is called Tyndall effect. When a beam of light is passed through a colloidal dispersion, the illuminated path of light is visible. If you keep milk in a dark room and when a path of light is passed through it, you can see the path of light is visible. This effect is known as Tyndall effect, and the path is called the Tyndall cone. This phenomenon is due to the scattering of light by colloidal particles. Tyndall effect can be used to distinguish a colloid from a true solution. True solutions do not show Tyndall effect, while colloids shows Tyndall effect. The following conditions are to be satisfied for the phenomenon of Tyndall effect. If a substance or a solution, if it shows Tyndall effect, the 2 points that should satisfy are: the first one, the diameter of the dispersed particles is not much smaller than the wavelength of light used. The second that has to be satisfied is the refractive index of the dispersed phase and dispersion medium will differ greatly. So if these 2 conditions are satisfied, then the Tyndall effect is shown by that substance, which is satisfied in colloids and not satisfied in true solutions. So what is the first one? The diameter, that is the size of the dispersed particles, is not much smaller than the wavelength of light used. The second is the refractive index of the dispersed phase and dispersion medium will differ greatly. Tyndall effect has been used by Zsigmondy in devising ultramicroscope. What is an ultramicroscope? A strong beam of light is passed through a colloidal solution and the scattered light is viewed through a microscope placed at right angle. You can see a microscope is placed at right angles to the beam. That is, a path of light is being passed through a colloidal solution and the microscope is kept at right angles to the beam. The colloidal particles scatter the light and the particles can be detected as spots of light around a dark background. Colloidal particles cannot be seen under an ordinary microscope. So this is called an ultra microscope. The next property of colloidal solution is color. The color of the colloidal solutions depends on the wavelength of light scattered by the dispersed particles. Color of the colloidal solution depends on the wavelength of light scattered by the dispersed particles. The wavelength of light further depends on the size and the nature of the particles. As the size increases, the wavelength also will change. The color of the colloidal solution also changes with the manner in which the observer receives the light. For example, a mixture of milk and water appears blue when viewed by reflected light and red when viewed by transmitted light. So the color changes actually. Color changes because the manner in which how the observer receives the light. Also, the color can change depending upon the size of the particles. That is, as the size of the particles increases or decreases, the color also will change. The finest gold sol is red in color, and as this particle size increases, it appears purple, blue, and finally to gold. The next property of colloids is Brownian movement. When colloidal solutions are viewed under a powerful ultra microscope, the colloidal particles appear to be in a state of continuous zigzag motion all over the field of view. This motion was first observed by British botanist Robert Brown and is known as Brownian movement. This motion is independent of the nature of the colloid but depends on the size of the particles and viscosity of the solution. Smaller the size and lesser the viscosity, faster is the motion. So when a colloidal solutions are viewed under a powerful ultra microscope, the colloidal particles, as you can see here, the colloidal particles appear to be in a state of continuous zigzag motion all over the field of view. This motion was first observed by British botanist Robert Brown and is known as Brownian movement. This movement is due to the bombardment of colloidal particles by molecules of the dispersion medium which are in constant motion. You can see here the Brownian movement. The particles, that is zigzag motion of colloidal particles, is called Brownian movement. And this Brownian movement is actually responsible for the stability of the salt. It is because of this zigzag motion that the particles are not settling down, which is responsible for the stability of the salt. This point is really important. What are the reasons for the stability of a colloidal salt? One reason is Brownian movement. The second very important property is charge on colloidal particles. Colloidal particles always carry an electric charge. The nature of this charge is the same on all the particles in a given colloidal solution and may either be positive or negative. So you, for example, the hemoglobin. In hemoglobin, the particles are the dispersed phase, all are positively charged. Metals, you take the particle, when you are preparing a metal colloid, all the dispersed particles, the charge of the dispersed particles will be negatively charged. Salts of starch, gum, gelatin, in all these, the dispersed particles have the same charge which is negatively charged. And this is the second reason for the stability of the colloid. All colloidal particles, repeating it once again, all colloidal particles carry charge either positive or negative. In a colloid, all particles will have the same charge. As I told you, this similarity in charges is responsible for the stability of the colloidal salt. The first one you can see the particles all are negatively charged. The second we can see they are positively charged. That is, in a colloid the charges will be the same. Due to the same charge on the colloidal particles, they repel each other and this prevents them from coming together and coagulating or settling. Then the charge on the colloidal particles gives them the stability. This is what gives them the stability. Now, what is the reason for the charge on the colloidal particles? The first reason may be during electrodispersion method for the preparation of colloidal salt, we have learned the particles will capture electrons. First reason is the particles in that method of preparing colloids, the particles can capture electrons and as a result a charge can be formed on the colloidal particles. Second one is due to preferential adsorption. It is, so the spelling is wrong here. Due to preferential adsorption of ions. The salt particles acquire positive or negative charge by preferential adsorption of positive or negative ions. When two or more ions are present in the dispersion medium, preferential adsorption of ions common to the colloidal. Preferential adsorption means one ion will be common and the common ion is adsorbed and as a result the charge, the colloidal particles can acquire charge. So the second very important reason is the preferential adsorption of ions. An example is given in a textbook. When silver nitrate, that is AgNO3 solution, is added to potassium iodide solution. Once again, when silver nitrate solution is added to potassium iodide solution, the precipitate formed will be naturally, we know, silver nitrate plus potassium iodide. The precipitate is silver iodide. This silver iodide will absorb iodide ions from the dispersion medium because the dispersion medium is potassium iodide. So the silver iodide will absorb the same ion, iodide ions, and iodide ions are negatively charged. So AgI is the precipitate form. It absorbs the iodide ion, the same ion, common ion, and it becomes negatively charged. As a result, that colloid becomes negatively charged. Now the reverse, that is, the first one, silver nitrate solution was added to potassium iodide. Second is reverse it. When potassium iodide solution is added to AgNO3 solution, then a positively charged salt results due to the adsorption of Ag plus ions. That is, silver iodide is all the same precipitate AgI is formed here also, but here AgNO3 is the dispersion medium. So AgI will adsorb the common ion, here it is silver. It adsorbs silver, Ag plus, and hence that colloidal salt will become positively charged. Another example given in a textbook is if FeCl3 is added to excess of hot water. When FeCl3 is added to excess of hot water, a positively charged salt of hydrated ferric oxide is formed due to adsorption of Fe3 plus ions. That is, Fe2O3 XH2O is formed. It adsorbs a common ion from FeCl3. So it becomes positively charged. When ferric chloride is added to sodium hydroxide, first it was added to hot water. Second, when ferric chloride is added to hot water, a negatively charged salt is obtained by the adsorption of OH minus. So this is called the preferential adsorption of ions. When more than one ion is present in the solution, a common ion is absorbed by the colloidal particle. That is, having acquired a positive or a negative charge by selective adsorption on the surface of colloidal particles, as said above, this layer can attract the counter ions from the medium, forming a second layer. So in the first example, as I told you, when silver nitrate solution is added to potassium iodide, silver iodide is formed, which adsorbs I minus from potassium iodide. So it has already adsorbed I minus. After that, it can also adsorb the second ion, that is K plus. So two layers can be formed. So AgI is adsorbing first I minus, then it will adsorb the other ion, that is potassium, and become positively charged. So two layers are present on the colloid. The combination of the two layers of opposite charges, because both are oppositely charged, around the colloidal particle is called Helmholtz electrical double layer. The combination of two layers of opposite charges around the colloidal particle is called HELM, HOLTZ, Helmholtz electrical double layer. According to the modern views, the first layer of ions is firmly held because that was formed first, and it is called the fixed layer. Well, the second layer is mobile, which is termed as the diffused layer. Since separation of charge is a zeta of potential, the charges of opposite signs on the fixed and the diffused parts of the double layer results in the difference in potential between these layers. This potential difference between the fixed layer and the diffused layer of opposite charges is called the electrokinetic potential or the zeta potential. That is, when the two layers, the fixed layer is formed first, second it adsorbs the counter ions from the solution, an oppositely charged particle is also adsorbed. There are two layers formed. The potential difference between the fixed layer and the diffused layer of opposite charges is called the electrokinetic potential or the zeta potential, which is very important. So here I'm repeating it once again. AgI colloid adsorbs Ag plus ions or I minus ions, whichever is present even in the solution during the preparation. When I minus is adsorbed, the colloid AgI minus, it becomes negatively charged. When it adsorbs Ag plus, when the precipitate adsorbs Ag plus, it becomes positively charged. Electrokinetic potential or zeta potential I explained earlier. You can go through your textbook. This is properly and clearly written in your textbook. After getting positive or negative charge by adsorption, the layer adsorbs counter ions from the solution, forming a second layer. You can see here AgI first adsorbs I minus, then it adsorbs K plus. Thus, there are two layers of opposite charge on the colloidal particles. This is called Helmholtz electrical double layer. First layer is fixed and the second diffused or mobile layer. The difference in potential between the fixed layer and the mobile layer of opposite charges is called the electrokinetic potential or zeta potential, which I had discussed earlier. Next is properties electrophoresis. The existence of charge on the colloidal particles is confirmed by electrophoresis experiment. Electrophoresis experiment. You can see the diagram here. Since the colloidal particles are charged, they move under an electrical potential. This movement of colloidal particles under an applied electric field is called electrophoresis. That is, in this case, that as you can see, the colloidal solution is kept in a U-tube. And when electrical potential is applied between two platinum electrodes, which is dipped in the colloidal solution, the colloidal particles move towards one or the other electrode. This movement of colloidal particles under an applied electric potential is called electrophoresis. Positively charged particles moves towards the cathode, while negatively charged particles moves towards the anode. You can see here in the experiment, there is a dispersion medium. The colloidal solution is kept in a U-tube, and as the electric current is passed, the particles, if it is a positively charged particle, it will move to the cathode. If it is a negatively charged particle, it will move to the anode. The movement of dispersion medium through an applied electrical field is called electroosmosis. That is, when electrophoresis, that is movement of particles, is prevented by some suitable means, it is observed that the dispersion medium begins to move in an electric field. That is called electroosmosis. So here it is written movement of dispersion medium. So how is it done? During this process, when the movement of particles is prevented by some suitable means, then we can find that the dispersion medium will begin to move in an electric field. This phenomenon is called electroosmosis. Next is coagulation or precipitation. What is coagulation or precipitation? The stability of a lyophobic salt is due to the presence of charge on colloidal particles. If somehow the charge is removed, we have learned earlier, when there is a charge, they are stable because repulsion takes place. So if by some method, if you remove the charge, the particles will come nearer to each other to form aggregates, or they will coagulate and settle down under the force of gravity. The process of settling of colloidal particles is called coagulation or precipitation of the salt. We have learned what is peptization earlier. Peptization is conversion of a precipitate into a colloidal salt. Here, a colloidal particle is getting converted to a precipitate. So, it is the reverse of coagulation is the reverse of peptization. So repeating it once again, particles in a lyophobic system are readily coagulated, while that of a lyophilic system does not readily precipitate. The settling down of a colloidal particles by the addition of an electrolyte is called coagulation or precipitation. When an electrolyte is added to a colloid, it neutralizes the charge on that is, if you are adding an electrolyte of opposite charge, then the particles will neutralize and the repulsion between the particles is reduced. So all the particles will come together and coagulation will take place. The ion carrying opposite charge of colloidal particles is responsible for coagulation. It is also called flocculation and is called the flocculating ion. Now, it is found that generally observed that greater the valency of the flocculating ion added, greater is its power to cause precipitation. That is, the valency of the added ion is greater, the precipitation power is also greater. This is known as Hardy-Schulze rule. Greater the valency of the flocculating ion, greater is its power to cause coagulation or precipitation. For a negatively charged ion, As2 arsenate sulfide salt, the flocculating power is aluminium's valency is greater compared to barium and the least for sodium. So the greater power of coagulation will be for Al3 plus, greater than Ba2 plus, greater than Na plus. When an electrolyte is added to a colloid, it gets precipitated. When an electrolyte is added to a colloid, it gets precipitated. Flocculation value. What is flocculation value? It is defined in millimoles of electrolyte. The millimoles of electrolyte required to cause the precipitation of the salt is called the flocculating power. That is the minimum concentration of an electrolyte in millimoles per liter required to cause precipitation of a salt in 2 hours is called the flocculating value or coagulating value. The smaller the quantity needed, the higher will be the coagulating power of an ion. Repeating it once again, the minimum concentration of an electrolyte in millimoles per liter required to cause precipitation of a salt in 2 hours is called the coagulating value. And smaller the quantity needed, higher will be the coagulating power of an ion. So as we have told, the Hardy-Schulze rule is greater the valency, greater will be the coagulating power. Similarly, for the case of the flocculating power or the coagulating power of the anion is also the same. That is, FeCN6 4 minus has greater coagulating power than PO4 3 minus, which is greater than SO4 2 minus, which is greater than Cl minus. So you can refer the textbook for all these. Next is protection. That is coagulation of lyophilic salt. Next is actually coagulation of lyophilic salt. Please open your textbook always. There are 2 factors which are responsible for the stability of lyophilic salt. You can see in the diagram also. These factors are the charge and solvation of the colloidal particles. That is, the lyophilic salts are stable because of 2 reasons. Charge and solvation of colloidal particles. They have similar charge, so it is stable. The particles are solvated, that is, it has a covering of the solvent, and that is another reason for its stability. When these 2 factors are removed, that is, when the charge is removed and the covering of the solvent around the particle is also removed, a lyophilic salt can be coagulated. This is done first one by adding an electrolyte. When you are adding an electrolyte of opposite charge, it will neutralize and coagulation will take place. Second, by adding a suitable solvent. When you are adding a solvent which is soluble with the dispersion medium, the solvent, the solvated, that is the covering around the particle, is removed, and hence the stability also decreases. When solvents such as alcohol and acetone are added to hydrophilic salts, the solvent is alcohol or acetone. Hydrophilic means the solvent is water. When you are adding alcohol or acetone, the covering around the particle, that is a solvation, the protection given around the particle is removed because it is soluble, and hence the coagulation will take place. So lyophilic salts are much more stable towards electrolytes than lyophobic salts. Lyophilic salts can protect lyophobic salts also from precipitation by electrolytes. That is, lyophilic salts are more stable than lyophobic salts. This is due to the fact that lyophilic colloids are extensively solvated, which I mentioned earlier. You can see here there is a covering actually around the particle by the solvent. That is, the solvents are covered. Lyophilic colloids have a unique property of protecting lyophobic salts. Hence, lyophilic colloids can be used for protecting lyophobic colloids. When a lyophilic salt is added to a lyophobic salt, the lyophilic particles form a layer around the lyophobic particles and thus protect the latter from electrolytes. So lyophilic colloids used for this purpose are called protective colloids. Lyophilic salts form a protection layer around lyophobic salts. Electrolytes does not easily penetrate the lyophilic salt. Such lyophilic salts are called protective colloids because they are used for protecting lyophobic colloids. Actually, gold number is not given in your present NCERT textbook but can be of information to you. Gold number refers to the protective power of a lyophilic colloid. Since it is not there in your NCERT, you need not study. Gold number is a number of milligrams of lyophilic colloid that will just prevent the precipitation of 10 milliliter of a gold salt on the addition of 1 ml of 10% NaCl solution. Smaller the gold number, greater is the protective power. Gold number, you need not go through it because it is not there in your NCERT text. The next part in surface chemistry is emulsions. What are emulsions? Emulsions are liquid-liquid colloidal systems. That is, the dispersion of finely divided droplets in another liquid. If a mixture of two immiscible or partially miscible liquid is shaken, a course of dispersion of one liquid in the other is obtained, which is called emulsion. So emulsion is simply liquid dispersed in liquid. They are liquid-liquid colloidal solutions. When oil is shaken with water, we get an emulsion. You can see oil plus water is an example of an emulsion. There are two types of emulsions. Oil in water type of emulsion and water in oil type of emulsion. Oil in water, that is, it's clear from the type itself. Droplets of oil is present in water. Water is the dispersion medium, oil is the dispersed phase. Here it is the reverse. Oil is the dispersion medium and water is the dispersed phase. So droplets of water in oil. Dispersed phase here is, as I told you earlier, is oil, and dispersed phase here is water. Dispersion medium is water here, and here dispersion medium is oil. Here oil is in greater amount and here water is in greater amount. Example, milk. Milk is actually oil in water, liquid in water is an example of oil in water type. Butter is an example of water in oil type. Emulsions are usually unstable. We know when we mix oil and water, it will separate after some, immediately it will separate. So we know the emulsions are actually unstable, and on keeping they will separate into two layers. A substance known as emulsifying agent is added to stabilize an emulsion. So in order to stabilize an emulsion, we have to add an emulsifying agent, otherwise they will separate into two layers. These emulsifying, what is the role of the emulsifying agent? They cover the droplets and prevent them from separating. Just like we have learned for lyophilic salt, it is solvated. The solvent has a covering around the particle. Same way here also, the emulsifying agent forms a cover around the droplets. Examples of emulsifying agents are soaps, detergents, gums, proteins, etc. Emulsions can be diluted only with the dispersion medium. That is, when you are adding a dispersion medium, it will get diluted. Earlier, the emulsifying agents, that is usually the emulsifying agents used for oil in water type are proteins, gums, natural and synthetic soaps, etc. For water in oil type, heavy metal salts of fatty acids, long chain alcohols, lamp black, etc. are used as emulsifying agents. Detection of emulsions. Detection test. If an emulsion can be diluted with water, then the dispersion media is oil in water type, because water is present in excess, or it is present more. So when you're diluting it, emulsion can, if it is possible to dilute, then that type of emulsion is oil in water. If it cannot be diluted, means here oil, water in oil type. Oil is the dispersion medium. You cannot dilute it because water is not soluble in the solvent oil. There is another one, dye test, which is not there in your textbook. When add an oil soluble dye, if the droplets becomes colored, it is oil in water type. An oil soluble dye, if you are adding, if the droplets become colored, it is oil in water. If the background becomes colored, it is water in oil type, which is not there in your textbook. It's for a general emulsion, general information. Emulsions, one important point in the textbook is emulsions can be broken into constituent liquids also. You can separate the emulsions, and demulsification can take place. Separating of the liquids from the emulsion. This can be done, which is very important. This can be done by heating, freezing, and centrifuging. The sentence is given in your textbook, is not given here. The last one is some examples of colloids around us. The first one is blue color of the sky. Dust particles along with water, suspended air, scatter the blue light which reaches our sky, and the sky looks blue because of this scattering. Second is cloud formation. There are small droplets of water suspended in air, and these droplets in the aerosol grow big in size and come down as rain. That is, when a large mass of air containing dust particles is cooled, the moisture from the air condenses on the surfaces of these particles, forming fine droplets. These droplets, being colloidal in nature, continue to float in air in the form of mist or fog. Clouds are actually aerosols having small droplets of water suspended in air. On account of condensation in the upper atmosphere, the colloidal droplets of water grow bigger and bigger in size till they come down in the form of rain. So this is the second type of colloid that we see around us. Third is artificial rain. It is possible to cause artificial rain by throwing electrified sand or spraying a salt containing a charge opposite to one on the clouds from an aeroplane. So in that way, you can create or form artificial rain. The particles in the cloud are charged. Hence, on throwing electrified sand or spraying a salt having opposite charge can make the water particles, a charge will be removed, the particles will become bigger, and as a result, it will fall down as rain. Next is fog. Fog also we can see that is also an example of a colloid. if air containing dust particles is cooled below its dew point, as I had repeated it earlier, moisture from the air condenses on the dust particles, and these droplets are colloidal in nature and float in air, forming fog or mist. Many food articles are colloidal in nature. We have learned many examples also: milk, butter, ice cream, fruit juices, etc. Blood. Blood is a colloidal solution of albuminoid substance. When alum and FeCl3 solutions are applied, the bleeding stops. Why? Because the coagulation or clotting of blood takes place, because it is oppositely charged. You are adding a substance which is oppositely charged. Delta formation. Delta is a deposit of clay formed at the place where the river water meets seawater. So when the river water meets seawater, electrolytes are present in the seawater. As a result, coagulation takes place and the river will take a different path, and this results in the formation of delta. The delta is a deposit of clay formed at a place where river water meets seawater. The electrolytes present in the seawater coagulate the colloidal particles of clay in the river water with the formation of delta. Application of colloids. The first application in medicine. Since colloids are easily adsorbed by the tissues, many medicines are prepared in the colloidal form. That is, the colloids, when used as medicines, they are easily assimilated in our body. So most of the medicines that we see are in the colloidal form, and that is why it's written also shake well before use, because it gets converted to the colloidal form. Next application is the froth flotation process, which I had mentioned in the last part. Froth flotation process is a process of separating the sulfide ores from the impurity. Here the powdered ore is treated in an emulsion of pine oil. That is, pine oil is mixed with the impurity, air is blown, an emulsion is formed. As a result, the sulfide ores will be adsorbed on the surface. The sulfide ores will adsorb, and gang means the impurity. The impurities will be settling at the bottom. So this you will be learning in metallurgy. There it will be more clear to you. Next, purification of water. The negatively charged mud particles present in water can be coagulated by adding electrolytes like Al3 plus present in alum. You can put alum. Most of you might have seen that. Most of you might have used also while cleaning water. When an alum is tied with a string to the water, all the mud particles or the colloidal particles will get attracted to alum or will get adsorbed on alum. As a result, the impurities or the muddy particles can be removed, and later on it can be decanted. So alum is used for the purification of water here. Next is tanning. Tanning is animal hides or skins are colloidal in nature. When a hide, that is a skin, which has positively charged particles, is soaked in tannin, Tannin, which contains negatively charged colloidal particles, mutual coagulation takes place. This results in the hardening of leather, and this is how the leather is made hard. This process is termed as tanning. Chromium salts are also used in place of tanning. Reading it, the animal hides are positively charged colloidal particles. When these are soaked in Tannin, actually that is the correct spelling, which contains negatively charged colloidal particles, mutual coagulation takes place and results in the hardening of leather. This is called tanning. Photographic films. These are prepared by coating an emulsion of AgBr in gelatin or celluloid films. Here an emulsion, formation of emulsion takes place. AgBr is light sensitive. Next, rubber. Rubber latex is actually a colloid containing negatively charged colloidal particles. These are coagulated to get rubber by adding formic acid. Industrial products. Paints, inks, plastics, rubber, etc. are of colloidal solutions. Next one, is Cottrell smoke precipitate. That is electrical precipitation of smoke. Let me first explain. Smoke, as we all know, is a colloidal solution of solid particles such as carbon, arsenic compounds, dust, etc. in air. The smoke, before it comes out from the chimney, is led through a chamber containing plates having a charge opposite to that carried by smoke particles. That is, before going out, it is passed through a chamber where the plates has an opposite charge to that of the smoke particles. The particles, on coming in contact with these plates, will lose their charge. When the charge is lost, what happens? They will get precipitated and will settle down, and the smoke that goes out will be free of these impurities. Repeating it once again, smoke is a colloid of particles such as carbon, dust, etc. in air. Smoke from factories, etc. cause air pollution. Before it comes out from the chimney, smoke is led through a chamber containing plates having an opposite charge to that of smoke particles. The particles will lose their charge and will get precipitated. So here you can find the smoke is going out the chimneys. Inside the chimneys, a Cottrell precipitator is attached. The smoke will go in. When on passing through the plates, it will lose the charge, and the gas that goes out will be free of these impurities. Thank you.